Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're diving into what I can only describe as a darkly absurd, incredibly morbid competition. We're going to examine the absolute worst, most terrifying tyrants in human history to see who truly takes the crown. Let's just jump right in. So, the bizarre question we're trying to answer is which emperor was truly the cruelest? And look, we aren't just looking at the sheer body count here. We're judging these historical monsters on their absolute absurdity, the total pointlessness of their actions, and the deeply dark psychology driving their madness. Section 1. Rome's Absurd Madmen. The Chaos of Caligula and Nero. We're kicking off our dark tournament in ancient Rome, looking at two contenders who literally turned mass murder into bizarre theatrical performances. On one side, we pit Caligula, whose violence was purely chaotic, against Nero, whose cruelty was a lot more systematic. I mean, Nero famously forced the Roman elite to sit and praise his absolutely terrible lyra playing. Imagine being trapped in a theater, forced to clap for a tone-deaf emperor, because if you didn't, well, you were dead. But then you have the terrifying randomness of Caligula. According to historians, his morning routine literally consisted of waking up and asking, "Who will I kill today?" His own family members basically weren't sure they'd even survive until dinner when they casually said, "Good morning." It's like a dark comedy sketch, except it was terrifyingly real. And this Roman madness escalated so incredibly fast. We start with Caligula's localized palace paranoia, then move to Nero's reign of ideological terror, culminating in the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. While the city burned, Nero casually played music. He was totally focused on his cultural prestige while thousands of his own citizens literally burned to death or were scrambling to build shelters out of garbage. Crazy, right? Section 2. Ivan's Paranoid Terror. The Oprichnina. Moving east to 16th century Russia, the dark humor gets, well, considerably darker as we meet Ivan the Terrible. After wars and personal tragedies just completely shattered his mind, Ivan birthed history's most terrifying intelligence service, the Oprichnina. This wasn't just your standard police force. It was a highly organized system of espionage, intrigue, and completely unprovoked executions. The whole goal? To terrify the Russian population into total, unquestioning submission. The really crucial point here is the absurd theatricality of his paranoia. Ivan created a literal nightmare army. These guys dressed entirely in black, wore actual horsehead badges, and would just break into homes at midnight to torture people who simply looked at them the wrong way. Oh, and in the city of Novgorod, they tossed 5,000 people into the freezing Volga River simply because the city looked a bit too wealthy to him. Absolutely wild. The absolute peak of this erratic madness actually happened at the dinner table. In a sudden fit of rage, Ivan casually killed his own son during a family meal by striking him in the head with a staff. He literally watched it happen and then staged a fake mourning period. It's a level of personal cruelty that honestly borders on the unbelievable. Now, before we meet our final major contender, we definitely have to acknowledge some honorable, or rather dishonorable mentions. You've got Qin Shi Huang of China, who literally buried living slaves with his terracotta army just so he'd have servants in the afterlife. Then there's Vlad the Impaler, who notoriously ate lunch surrounded by the impaled corpses of his enemies, purely for psychological warfare. And Emperor Hirohito, whose devastating 20th century atrocities, like the Unit 73-1 biological tests and the Nanjing Massacre, went largely unpunished. Section 3. Leopold's Cold Math. The Corporate Atrocity. All right, now we shift gears from theatrical madness to the 19th century, and here the dark comedy just instantly dies. It's replaced by a cold corporate slaughter managed by Belgium's King Leopold II. 8 to 10 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That staggering figure represents the African lives wiped out in the Congo Free State. And it wasn't for some twisted ideology or paranoid delusions. It was purely for rubber extraction quotas. Just a cold economic calculation. This very quickly mutated into an industrial nightmare. If a worker failed to meet their monthly rubber quota, their entire family could be murdered. And it gets worse. To prove the bullets weren't wasted, hundreds of thousands of severed hands were collected and shipped back as a horrific form of corporate receipt. It is bureaucratic cruelty at its absolute sickening worst. What makes Leopold uniquely terrifying was summed up perfectly by a Belgian journalist of the era who said, "His eyes never looked here." Leopold oversaw this entire massacre from Europe, basically like an accountant reviewing a financial report. To him, millions of agonizing deaths were just mathematical errors or acceptable losses on a spreadsheet. He didn't see humans, he literally just saw numbers. Section 4. The true tyrant. Who is really to blame? So, looking across this grim history, from Caligula's personal entertainment to Leopold's bureaucratic spreadsheets, we really have to ask what the true nature of this cruelty is. Whether it was rulers killing for absurd personal pleasure, like Caligula and Ivan, or utilizing vast bureaucratic systems, like Leopold and Hirohito, there's one incredibly common thread. They completely stripped humans of their inherent value. They turned living, breathing people into mere tools, numbers, or playthings for power. Now, obviously, these men are the absolute worst expressions of human nature. But you know what the terrifying truth is? They didn't act alone. Cruelty is a collaborative effort. Let's actually break down the anatomy of how this happens. First, a tyrant demands unchecked power. Second, the masses remain completely silent. And as a direct result, cruelty becomes a systemic reality. Unchecked power only mutates into historical atrocity when it's fueled by that dangerous, it's not my problem attitude from the general population. And that brings us to a final, really provocative thought. Cruelty is the combination of the silence, obedience, and indifference of a large number of people. The most terrifying villain in history isn't just the emperor sitting on the throne. It's the silent masses who just stand by and let it happen. It kind of makes you wonder, looking at the world around us today, are we repeating that exact same silence? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.